The Alpha King never planned to buy anyone that night. The winter auction was supposed to be routine. Every year the same wolves were brought to the stage, rogues, criminals and broken omegas no one wanted. They were sold to the highest bidder while nobles watched from the shadows and placed their bets. But when they dragged the last girl onto the stage, the entire hall started laughing. Because the girl in chains didn't look like a wolf anyone would fight over. She was thin, barefoot with bruises dark across her skin. An omega the auctioneer called damaged goods. Starting price, 1 silver coin, the man announced. Silence followed, but no one raised a hand. No wolf in that hall wanted a broken omega. But high above the auction floor, the Alpha King suddenly went completely still. Because the moment he looked at her, his wolf reacted in a way it never had before. There was no anger and no curiosity. Something deeper, something ancient. Something that made every instinct in his body whisper the same impossible truth. That girl on the stage did not belong in chains. The feeling spread through his wolf like a forgotten memory trying to wake. A prophecy the moon goddess had whispered to him a century ago. A prophecy he had spent years trying to forget. The girl standing on that auction stage looked nothing like a queen. She looked like someone the world had already broken. And yet, when the bidding finally began, the Alpha King did something no ruler had ever done before. He raised his hand and bought the broken omega. The auction hall fell silent. Even the auctioneer stared at him in confusion. Because kings did not buy broken wolves. Kings bought warriors, allies, land. Not an omega the entire hall had just laughed at. But the Alpha King didn't lower his hand. His gaze remained fixed on the girl standing on the stage. And for the first time since she had been dragged into the room, the omega slowly lifted her head and their eyes met. And something in that moment made the Alpha King's wolf shift beneath his skin. Not in anger or possession, but in recognition. The girl seemed to feel it too. Because the moment their eyes met, the chains around her wrists trembled. Just slightly, so slightly that no one else in the hall noticed. No one except the Alpha King. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. Sold to His Majesty. The guards stepped forward and unlocked the chains. The omega swayed as the metal fell from her wrists. For a moment it looked like she might collapse, but she didn't. Instead she slowly turned toward the Alpha King. And when she did, the torches in the hall flickered. Just once, and that was enough to make several wolves glance uneasily toward the ceiling. But the Alpha King was no longer looking at the torches. He was looking at the girl. Because something about her presence was beginning to change. And deep inside his chest, his wolf whispered a single, impossible word, mate. And before we continue this legend, I want to ask you something. If you were the Alpha King in that moment, would you trust the instinct of your wolf? Or would you walk away from the broken omega everyone else had already rejected? Tell me what you would have done. Because tonight's story is about a choice made in a single moment. A choice that would change the fate of an entire kingdom. And it all began in that auction hall. The night the Alpha King bought the omega no one else wanted. Chapter 1 Mate, he heard his wolf say. The word struck through the Alpha King's mind like lightning. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Because that word was impossible. Yet his wolf repeated it again, mate. The chains clattered against the wooden stage as the guards stepped away from the girl. The sound echoed through the silent hall. Around them, whispers began spreading among the nobles. Some were amused, while some confused. But many wolves were watching the Alpha King now. Because every ruler in that hall knew the same thing. Kings did not buy broken wolves. And yet tonight, their king had just done exactly that. Slowly, the Alpha King rose from his seat. The movement alone silenced the room again. His cloak brushed against the marble floor as he descended the steps of the balcony. Every eye followed him as he approached the stage. The omega hadn't moved. She stood exactly where the guards had left her. Wrists red where the chains had rubbed against her skin. Shoulders slightly hunched, as if she expected another blow at any moment. But when the Alpha King stopped in front of her, she lifted her head. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to shift. The Alpha King felt it immediately. Not through sight. Through instinct. Something inside his wolf surged forward with sudden certainty. Mate. The Omega seemed to feel something too, because her breath caught softly, and for a brief moment, the chains lying on the stage beside her trembled. So slightly that no one else in the hall noticed. No one except the Alpha King. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Several wolves shifted their weight, instinct whispering that something strange was happening. But none of them understood what. The Alpha King stepped closer. The Omega flinched. It was a small movement, barely noticeable. But it was enough to make something dark stir in the king's chest. Because wolves did not treat their own like this. Not even the weakest Omega deserved chains. His hand lifted slowly. The entire hall watched the movement. The Omega's eyes followed his hand cautiously, as if she expected pain. But the Alpha King did not strike. Instead, his fingers gently brushed against her wrist. And the moment their skin touched, the torches in the hall flared. Not violently. Just enough that several wolves gasped. The Alpha King felt the reaction instantly. His wolf surged forward again, mate. But the Omega reacted very differently. The moment his hand touched her arm, her knees buckled. She collapsed forward before anyone could react. The Alpha King caught her instinctively. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Because kings did not catch fallen Omegas. Yet the Alpha King held her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her body felt far too light in his arms. As if she had not eaten properly in days. The king looked down at her face. Her eyes were closed now. But her breathing was steady. Alive but unconscious. Then something else caught his attention. Something faint and almost invisible. A thin silver mark pulsed beneath the skin of her wrist. The Alpha King froze. Because he had seen that symbol once before. Long ago, and the moment he recognized it, a cold realization began to spread through his chest. The prophecy he had tried to forget for a century had finally begun. And if that was true, then the broken Omega he had just bought for a single silver coin might be far more dangerous than anyone in that hall could possibly imagine. Chapter 2. Mate. The word echoed through the Alpha King's mind like thunder. For several long seconds, he didn't move. The unconscious Omega rested in his arms, her body frighteningly light against his chest. Around them, the auction hall began to stir again. Whispers spread quickly through the nobles. Because something about what they had just witnessed felt wrong. Kings did not descend from their thrones to catch fallen Omegas. Kings did not carry them. And they certainly did not stare at them the way the Alpha King was staring now. Your Majesty. The auctioneer's nervous voice cut through the murmurs. If you would like, we can present another slave for inspection. The Alpha King lifted one hand. The man fell silent immediately. The king's patience for this place had ended. Without another word, he turned away from the stage. Still holding the Omega. That alone sent another ripple through the crowd. Because rulers did not carry their purchases. Servants did that. But the Alpha King ignored them all. His focus remained on the girl in his arms. Her breathing was weak, too weak. The faint silver mark beneath her wrist pulsed softly against his hand. Something about that mark unsettled his wolf. Not fear but recognition. Heavy footsteps approached from behind. My king. The voice belonged to Kalen, the royal beta. A warrior who had guarded the throne for years. Kalen's sharp eyes moved from the unconscious girl, to the silver mark, and back to the king. His brow slowly tightened. You felt it too, Kalen said quietly. The Alpha King did not answer. He didn't need to. The tension in the air said enough. Kalen lowered his voice further. That girl. Something about her presence changed the room. As if responding to his words, the torches along the walls flickered again. Several wolves stiffened. The Alpha King's gaze sharpened. Because the torches had reacted the same way when he touched her. Once could be coincidence, twice was not. My king, Kalen murmured. We should leave. The Alpha King nodded immediately. Something about this girl had begun to wake. And whatever it was, he did not want it happening inside a crowded auction hall. Without another word, he began walking toward the massive doors at the far end of the chamber. The nobles parted quickly to make way. But their whispers followed. Why would the king buy her? She looks half dead. That mark on her wrist, did you see it? The Alpha King ignored them, but Kaelin did not. The Beta's eyes moved carefully across the room, watching and measuring. Because warriors noticed something the nobles had not. Several wolves in the hall were no longer whispering. They were staring not at the king but at the girl. And their expressions had changed. Curiosity led to suspicion. And then something darker, interest. Kaelin stepped closer to the king. "We need to move faster," he muttered. The Alpha King didn't argue. Together they pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the cold night air. Moonlight spilled across the stone courtyard. For a moment, everything seemed quiet, peaceful. Then the Omega in the king's arms stirred. Her fingers twitched, and the moment the moonlight touched her skin, the silver mark beneath her wrist began to glow. Soft at first, then brighter. The Alpha King froze. Because the reaction was immediate. Across the courtyard, every wolf suddenly stiffened. One by one, they dropped to one knee. Not in fear or confusion, but in instinctive submission. The Alpha King's heart pounded. Because wolves did not kneel like this. Not even to their king. Yet every wolf in the courtyard now knelt without hesitation. All facing the unconscious Omega in his arms. And in that moment, the Alpha King understood something terrifying. The prophecy he had feared all his life had finally begun. Chapter 3. For several long seconds, no one moved. The courtyard had fallen completely silent. Wolves knelt across the stone ground, their heads lowered toward the unconscious Omega in the Alpha King's arms. Not one of them understood why. Not even the Alpha King. Because wolves bowed only to power. Yet the girl in his arms barely looked strong enough to stand. The silver mark on her wrist continued to glow softly in the moonlight. And the longer the moon touched her skin, the brighter it became. Kaelin was the first to speak. "My king." His voice carried a tension the Alpha King had rarely heard before. The king did not look away from the girl. "You see it too," he said quietly. Kaelin nodded. "I see it." The Beta's sharp eyes moved slowly across the courtyard. Every wolf remained on one knee, not by command or fear but by instinct. Kaelin had fought beside the Alpha King for years. He had seen armies kneel. He had seen rival alphas bow. But he had never seen wolves submit like this. Without hesitation and without any question. Without even understanding why. Kaelin lowered his voice. "That mark on her wrist." The Alpha King's jaw tightened. "I know." Because he had seen something like it once before. Long ago, inside a ruined temple dedicated to the moon goddess. But before Kaelin could ask anything more, the girl stirred. Her fingers twitched weakly against the king's cloak. The silver mark pulsed once, brighter. The Alpha King immediately looked down at her face. Her breathing had changed, still weak. But deeper now, as if something inside her was waking. "Careful," Kaelin warned quietly. But it was already happening. Slowly, the Omega's eyes opened. They were silver, not the pale gray of ordinary wolves. Not the golden glow of an alpha. But something deeper. Something ancient. For a moment she looked confused. As if she had woken somewhere she did not understand. Her gaze drifted across the courtyard. The kneeling wolves, the moonlight. Then finally, the Alpha King. For several seconds she simply stared at him. Then her voice came out soft. Barely stronger than a whisper. "You shouldn't have bought me." The Alpha King felt his wolf react instantly. "Mate," but the girl shook her head weakly. "You don't know what you've done." Kaelin stepped closer. Suspicion sharpened his voice. "Who are you?" The Omega didn't answer. Her silver eyes slowly lifted toward the sky. Toward the full moon above the courtyard. For a brief moment, the mark on her wrist flared brighter. Then suddenly her body went still. Fear flashed across her face. "They know." The Alpha King stiffened. Who? But the girl was already fading again. Her strength was disappearing as quickly as it had returned. Her fingers tightened weakly in the king's cloak. They've been looking for me. Her voice barely carried now. For years. Kalen's instincts ignited immediately. My king, he said sharply. We need to move. Now. The Alpha King didn't argue. Because the warning in the girl's voice had sent a cold ripple through his wolf. Someone else knew about her, someone dangerous. The king turned toward the palace gates. The guards were still kneeling. He had to command them to rise. Stand, the wolves obeyed instantly. But their eyes remained fixed on the girl. As if they could not look away. The Alpha King began walking toward the palace. Kalen stayed close beside him. But halfway across the courtyard, the beta suddenly stopped. His eyes snapped toward the dark tree line beyond the castle walls. Something had moved, just for a moment. A shadow where no shadow should be. Kalen's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. My king. The Alpha King followed his gaze. The forest beyond the walls looked still. Too still, then from somewhere deep within the darkness, a wolf howled. Not the call of a pack, not a territorial warning, a signal. The silver mark on the Omega's wrist flared again. Brighter than before, Kalen's voice dropped to a whisper. They found her. And beyond the trees, dozens of red eyes slowly opened in the darkness. Watching the castle, watching the girl in the Alpha King's arms, and waiting. Chapter 4. The red eyes in the forest did not follow them, they vanished. But Kalen knew that did not mean the danger had passed. It meant the hunters had chosen a better place to strike. The Alpha King moved quickly through the narrow streets, leaving the auction district. Torches burned along the stone walls of the city, their light flickering across empty alleyways. The unconscious Omega rested in his arms, the silver mark on her wrist glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. Kalen walked half a step behind him. His hand never left the hilt of his sword. They're still here, the beta said quietly. The Alpha King didn't slow. I know. Because his wolf felt them. Watching, waiting. The city streets should have been alive at this hour. Merchants, travelers, night guards. But tonight the streets were empty, too empty. Even the wind had gone silent. Kalen's eyes lifted toward the rooftops. Something moved, a shadow sliding across the edge of a building. My king. The Alpha King stopped. The Omega shifted weakly in his arms. The silver mark pulsed once bright. Then the shadows moved again. Not one, not two but dozens. Dark figures dropped silently from the rooftops around them. They landed in the street with unnatural grace. Wolves, but not ordinary wolves. Their eyes glowed red in the darkness. Their cloaks were black as night. And each one wore the same symbol carved into the leather across their chest. A crescent moon split in half by a black fong. Kalen's expression hardened instantly. Shadow wolves, the Alpha King's wolf growled deep in his chest. Every ruler knew the name. An ancient faction, older than most kingdoms. A pack that did not follow the moon goddess. They followed something else, something darker. One of the wolves stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered. His red eyes fixed on the girl in the king's arms. You found her, the man said calmly. The Alpha King's voice dropped into a low growl. You're trespassing in my city. The hunter did not react. Instead his gaze drifted to the glowing mark on the Omega's wrist. A slow smile spread across his face. Our Alpha will be very pleased. Kalen stepped forward immediately. You're not taking her. The hunter's smile widened. You misunderstand. His red eyes lifted toward the Alpha King. We're not asking. At that moment the Omega stirred again. Her silver eyes opened weakly. The mark on her wrist flared brighter. And the moment the light touched the shadow wolves, several of them stepped back. Not in fear but in recognition. The hunter at the front whispered softly. So it's true. The Alpha King tightened his grip around the girl. True. The hunter's red eyes gleamed. The moon heir lives. A cold silence fell across the street. The Alpha King felt his wolf surge with sudden fury. Because now the truth was clear. They had not come here by accident. They had been hunting her. For years, the hunter slowly drew a blade from his cloak. A long black dagger carved with ancient runes. Our Alpha has waited a very long time for her. Kalen raised his sword. Then he'll have to wait longer. The hunter tilted his head slightly. Then his voice dropped into a single command. Take her. The shadows exploded into motion. The first shadow wolf lunged straight for the Alpha King. Kalen's sword flashed through the torchlight. And the battle began. Chapter 5. The shadows exploded into motion. The first shadow wolf lunged straight for the Alpha King. Kalen moved faster. His sword flashed through the torchlight with a sharp metallic ring. The attacker was thrown backward across the stone street. But the others didn't hesitate. They came all at once. 4 wolves surged forward from the rooftops. Another 3 rushed from the alley behind them. The Alpha King shifted his stance instantly, tightening his hold around the unconscious Omega. Stay behind me. Kalen barked. The Beta stepped forward, blade raised. The next shadow wolf leapt. Kalen's sword cut a bright arc through the air. The wolf twisted midair, barely avoiding the strike, but Kalen's second movement was faster. The flat of his blade slammed into the attacker's chest. The shadow wolf crashed against the wall hard enough to crack the stone. Another wolf lunged from the side. This time the Alpha King moved. He shifted the girl carefully into one arm. And his free hand caught the attacker by the throat. The impact shook the street. The shadow wolf slammed into the ground beneath the king's grip. Red eyes burned with fury. But the Alpha King's voice dropped into a growl that rolled through the street like thunder. You chose the wrong prey. The wolf struggled. The wolf struggled and then went still. Because the king's alpha aura erupted outward like a storm. Even the shadow wolves felt it. For a moment the attackers hesitated. Kalen saw the opening. Move, he shouted. But the hunters recovered quickly. More shadows dropped from the rooftops. Too many. Kalen's expression hardened. My king, we're surrounded. The leader stepped forward again. His red eyes drifted toward the girl in the king's arms. Do you feel it? He said softly. The Alpha King didn't answer. But he did feel it. The silver mark on the Omega's wrist had begun to glow again brighter. The hunter's smile widened. She's waking up. At that moment, the girl stirred. Her fingers tightened weakly against the king's cloak. Silver light spread across her wrist like liquid moonlight. The shadow wolves froze. Every one of them stared at the glowing mark. Not in fear but in recognition. The hunter whispered softly. The moon heir. Then everything changed. The girl's eyes snapped open silver. It was the purest form of silver. The mark on her wrist ignited. A blast of power erupted outward. The street exploded with silver light. Torches shattered and windows cracked. The shadow wolves were thrown backward like leaves in a storm. Even Kalen stumbled. The Alpha King tightened his grip around her as the power surged again. But the girl looked terrified. I can't stop it, she whispered. The silver light pulsed again, stronger this time. For a moment the entire street glowed like daylight. Then the power vanished, silence fell. The shadow wolves slowly rose from the ground. But their expressions had changed. They were no longer confident. They were cautious. The hunter wiped blood from the corner of his mouth. Then he smiled again. Now I understand. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed. Understand what? The hunter tilted his head slightly. Our Alpha was right. His red eyes drifted toward the girl. You are far more valuable alive. Kalen stepped forward again. Try taking her. The hunter studied them for a moment. Then he slowly raised one hand. The remaining shadow wolves stepped back, retreating into the shadows. The Alpha King watched them disappear. They're leaving. Kalen shook his head. No, his eyes lifted toward the rooftops. They're regrouping. The hunter's voice echoed once more from the darkness. Run while you can, King. Because next time, His red eyes flickered briefly in the shadows. Our Alpha will come himself. Then the street went silent. Kalen exhaled slowly. My king. But before the Alpha King could answer, the silver mark on the girl's wrist suddenly burned again. This time it burnt brighter than before. The girl gasped, and her eyes widened, as if she could see something far away. The Alpha King leaned closer. What is it? Her voice trembled. He felt it. Kalen frowned. Who? The girl's silver eyes lifted slowly toward the dark horizon beyond the city. And for the first time since the battle began, true fear appeared in her voice. The Shadow Alpha. The silver mark flared one final time. And somewhere far beyond the kingdom, another mark answered. Chapter 6. The street slowly fell quiet again. Broken torches flickered weakly on the ground. Glass crunched beneath Kalen's boots as he scanned the rooftops one last time. They're gone, he said. But his hand remained on his sword. The Alpha King still hadn't lowered his guard. His attention was on the girl in his arms. The silver mark on her wrist had faded again, but the faint glow remained beneath her skin like moonlight trapped in flesh. You said he felt it, the king said quietly. The girl's breathing had steadied, but her body still trembled from the power she had unleashed. Yes. Kalen stepped closer. You mean the Shadow Alpha? The girl hesitated, then nodded slowly. The Alpha King's gaze sharpened. Explain. Her silver eyes drifted toward the moon above the city. When the mark awakens, she said softly, it calls to others who carry the same blood. Kalen frowned. The same blood. The girl looked down at the glowing mark on her wrist. My grandmother called it the moon blood. The Alpha King felt his wolf stir again at the words. Your grandmother knew about this? Yes. Her voice had grown steadier now. She said the moon goddess marked certain bloodlines long ago. Kalen crossed his arms. And you're one of them? The girl nodded. My grandmother always said our blood existed to protect balance. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed slightly. Balance between what? For a moment she didn't answer. Then her voice dropped. Between the moon and the shadow. Kalen exhaled quietly. So the Shadow Alpha hunts you? Yes, he does. Her fingers tightened slightly. Has been for years. The Alpha King studied her carefully. You were captured and sold at the auction. She nodded. They've been searching for me across the kingdoms. Kalen's expression darkened. You're telling me those hunters have been tracking you for years? Yes, they have. She lowered her gaze. They were close several times. Her voice softened again. But tonight, when the mark awakened, she looked toward the distant horizon beyond the rooftops. He felt it. The Alpha King's wolf growled softly beneath his skin. The Shadow Alpha. Yes, she nodded. Her silver eyes lifted to meet his. And now he knows where I am. Kalen let out a slow breath. Well, that's inconvenient. The Alpha King ignored him. How long before he reaches this city? The girl hesitated. I don't know. Kalen looked toward the distant towers rising above the rooftops. The royal palace. Then we don't stay here. The Alpha King nodded once. We move. The girl shifted slightly in his arms. You're taking me there? Yes, I am. Her silver eyes searched his face. But why? The Alpha King held her gaze. Because his wolf had already spoken the truth. She was his mate. But he didn't say it. Instead his voice remained calm. Because the palace walls are the only place the Shadow Alpha will hesitate to attack. Kalen gave a quiet, humorless laugh. You're assuming he hesitates. The Alpha King's eyes lifted toward the dark horizon. He will. The girl frowned slightly. How do you know? The Alpha King's voice dropped into something colder. Because if the Shadow Alpha enters my kingdom. His eyes hardened, then he won't leave it alive. Chapter 7. The palace gates rose above the city like a mountain of silver stone. Tall banners bearing the king's crest drifted softly in the night wind. Even at this hour, the royal guards stood ready. Their armor gleamed beneath the moonlight. The moment they saw the Alpha King approaching, the guards straightened. "My king!" The massive gates began opening immediately. But as the king stepped through the torchlight, carrying the girl in his arms, the captain of the guard frowned. Because the silver mark on her wrist was glowing. Not brightly, but enough to be seen. "My king," the captain said carefully. "Who is she?" The Alpha King didn't slow. "Open the gates." The captain obeyed. But his eyes remained fixed on the mark. As the gates closed behind them, the palace courtyard slowly came alive. Servants emerged from the hallways. More guards gathered near the steps. But the moment the girl crossed the courtyard, something strange happened. The torches flickered, once, twice. Then the moonlight above the palace suddenly grew brighter. Kaelin noticed immediately. That's not normal. The Alpha King had already felt it. The silver mark on the girl's wrist pulsed again. And suddenly every wolf in the courtyard froze. It wasn't fear, it was instinct. One guard slowly lowered his head. Another stepped back. Within seconds, half the wolves in the courtyard had unconsciously bowed. The captain stared in disbelief. "My king." The Alpha King's voice cut through the air. "Enough." His alpha command snapped them out of the trance. But the unease remained. Kaelin leaned closer. "They feel it." The Alpha King nodded slowly. "So do I." Because his wolf had been restless ever since the moment he saw her on that auction stage. The word mate echoed again in his mind. The girl stirred in his arms. Her silver eyes slowly opened. She looked around the courtyard in confusion. This place, her voice was faint. But something in her expression shifted. As if the palace itself was familiar. The Alpha King noticed. "You've been here before?" She shook her head slowly. "No," but her gaze drifted toward the palace towers. "But it feels like I should have." Kaelin frowned. "That's unsettling." The Alpha King began walking toward the palace doors. "Prepare the royal chambers." Servants rushed ahead. But the moment the girl crossed the palace threshold, the silver mark on her wrist suddenly flared, bright, and moonlight spilled across the marble floor. And for a brief moment, a second mark appeared. Not on her wrist but faintly across her collarbone. A crescent moon. Kaelin froze. "My king." The Alpha King saw it too. The symbol faded quickly, too quickly. But its meaning was unmistakable. The girl looked frightened. "What was that?" The Alpha King didn't answer. Because his wolf had already spoken the truth. His mate, her silver eyes lifted to meet his. For a moment neither of them moved. Then she asked quietly, "Why did you save me?" The Alpha King held her gaze. "You're not just a prisoner from an auction." His voice lowered. "You're something far more dangerous than that." Kaelin crossed his arms. "And judging by tonight," he glanced at the glowing mark, "the Shadow Alpha will stop at nothing to claim you." The girl lowered her gaze. "I know." The Alpha King stepped closer. "You're safe here." She looked up again. "Are you sure?" For a moment he didn't answer. Because far beyond the palace walls, beyond the sleeping city, beyond the forests that marked the kingdom's borders, wolves were already moving. Deep within the darkness of the forest, an entire pack slowly lowered their heads. A tall figure stepped from the shadows. His eyes burned crimson beneath the moonlight. And every wolf around him bowed. The Shadow Alpha had already entered the king's territory. And his hunt had just begun. Chapter 8. The palace halls were silent as the Alpha King carried the girl through the marble corridors. Servants hurried ahead, lighting torches along the walls. Yet the moment the silver mark on her wrist began to glow again, the flames flickered. Kaelin noticed immediately. "That keeps happening." The Alpha King didn't answer. His attention remained on the girl. Her silver eyes were open now, watching the vaulted ceiling above them. "This place feels strange." "How?" the king asked. She hesitated. "Familiar." Kaelin frowned. "You've never been here." "I know." Her gaze moved slowly across the ancient stone walls. But it feels like I should have. The Alpha King slowed slightly, because the feeling unsettled him as well. Not fear but recognition. They finally reached the royal chambers. Servants pushed the doors open quickly. The Alpha King stepped inside and gently placed the girl on the large bed. For the first time since the auction, she looked safe. But the silver mark on her wrist continued to glow faintly. Kaelin remained near the doorway. My king. The Alpha King looked at him. The archives. Kaelin raised an eyebrow. You're thinking prophecy. The king nodded once. Find everything about the moon blood. Kaelin disappeared down the corridor. The room fell quiet. The girl slowly sat up. You don't have to do that. The Alpha King folded his arms. I disagree. Her silver eyes studied him carefully. You're risking your kingdom. The king's voice was calm. My kingdom was already at risk the moment the Shadow Alpha entered my territory. She lowered her gaze. I never wanted this. For a moment the king said nothing. Then he stepped closer. You didn't choose it. Her eyes lifted. No, I did not. But now you have to survive it. Before she could respond, the doors opened again. Kaelin returned carrying a heavy leather book. Dust covered its edges. This was buried in the oldest archive. The Alpha King took the book. The pages were ancient. Older than the kingdom itself. Silver symbols of the moon goddess glowed faintly across the parchment. The king read the first line quietly. His expression shifted. Kaelin noticed immediately. What does it say? The Alpha King turned the page so they could see. Ancient words shimmered across the parchment. Kaelin read them slowly. When the moon heir awakens, the balance will break. The girl's fingers tightened slightly. And then, Kaelin continued. The moon will choose its king. The room fell silent. Kaelin looked at the Alpha King. That sounds like you. The girl shook her head slowly. No, it doesn't. Her silver eyes moved toward the king. It means the moon heir chooses him. The Alpha King felt his wolf stir again. She is our mate. Kaelin crossed his arms. So the moon goddess didn't just mark her. His eyes moved between them. She marked both of you. The girl looked uneasy. What happens if the Shadow Alpha gets the moon blood? The Alpha King turned another page. His expression darkened. The final line was written in darker ink. Kaelin read it quietly. If the shadow claims the moon, the world will kneel. At that moment, the silver mark on the girl's wrist suddenly burned. Brighter than before. The torches in the chamber went out. Moonlight poured through the windows like liquid silver. The girl gasped as the mark flared again. The crescent symbol across her collarbone appeared once more. The Alpha King stepped forward. Easy. But the power wasn't stopping. The silver light spread across the room. Then suddenly, it vanished. Darkness returned. The torches flickered back to life. The girl's breathing was unsteady. I didn't do that. The Alpha King looked toward the window. Because he had felt something. Something answering the power. Far beyond the palace walls. Beyond the kingdom, beyond the forests. Deep within the shadows, a tall figure stopped walking. Crimson eyes lifted slowly toward the moon. A faint silver glow burned across his palm. The Shadow Alpha had felt the prophecy awaken. And now he knew one thing for certain. The moon heir had found her king. Chapter 9. The palace walls had stood for centuries. They had survived wars, rebellions, and sieges from rival kingdoms. But on this night, every wolf inside those walls felt something they had never felt before. A presence, dark and ancient, moving toward the palace. The Alpha King felt it first. His wolf rose instantly beneath his skin. Kaelin noticed immediately. My king. The Alpha King was already walking toward the balcony overlooking the courtyard. He's here. Below them, the palace guards were shifting uneasily. Some had drawn their weapons. Others stepped back instinctively. because the wind carried a scent that made every wolf's instincts scream. The Alpha King stepped onto the balcony. And then he saw him. Standing alone in the center of the courtyard. A tall figure beneath the moonlight. Black cloak shifting like living shadow. Silver hair falling across his shoulders. Crimson eyes glowing in the darkness. The Shadow Alpha had arrived. Kalen exhaled slowly. Well, that's not good. The Shadow Alpha lifted his head. His crimson gaze met the Alpha King's instantly. You found her before I did. The Alpha King's voice dropped into a growl. You're trespassing. The Shadow Alpha smiled faintly. I am reclaiming something that belongs to me. She belongs to no one. The Shadow Alpha tilted his head. The moon heir was always meant to belong to the Shadow. At that moment, the palace doors opened. She stepped onto the balcony. She stepped onto the balcony. Moonlight fell across her like silver rain. The mark on her wrist glowed softly. The Shadow Alpha froze. Recognition flashed across his face. So it's really you. Her silver eyes met his calmly. My grandmother warned me about you. The Shadow Alpha chuckled softly. She always feared what you could become. The Alpha King stepped forward. You don't get to speak to her. The Shadow Alpha ignored him. Instead he stepped forward. You don't understand what you are, he said to her. Your power was never meant for this fragile world. His crimson eyes darkened. It was meant for me. The Alpha King descended the palace steps into the courtyard. Each step echoed against the stone. If you want her, he said quietly, you'll have to go through me. The Shadow Alpha smiled. Gladly, then darkness exploded from his body. Shadows surged across the courtyard like a storm of living smoke. The palace guards stumbled backward. Kalen drew his sword. But the Shadow Alpha moved faster than any wolf present. He struck. The Alpha King met him head-on. The clash of their power cracked the marble beneath their feet. Moonlight and shadow collided violently. For several seconds neither Alpha gave ground. Then the darkness surged. It slammed into the Alpha King and forced him backward across the courtyard. Kalen swore under his breath. My king. But the Alpha King refused to fall. He stood between the Shadow Alpha and the balcony. Between the darkness and her. The Shadow Alpha noticed. And he laughed. You would die for her. The Alpha King didn't hesitate. Yes, I would. The Shadow Alpha's crimson eyes turned toward the balcony. Then watch. He raised his hand. Darkness surged upward like a tidal wave. It rushed toward her, not to claim her, to destroy her. The Alpha King moved instantly. But before the shadows could reach her, the mark on her wrist ignited. Silver light burst from her skin. The darkness halted. The Shadow Alpha's smile faded. The silver glow spread slowly. From her wrist, to her arm, to the crescent symbol across her collarbone. Her eyes opened. They blazed with pure moonlight. But the darkness did not retreat. It fought back. Shadows crashed against the silver light. The courtyard trembled as shadow and moonlight battled for dominance. For a terrifying moment, the darkness pushed forward. The Alpha King felt the force of it. And in that moment he realized something. He had believed he was protecting her. But the moon had always been protecting him. She began walking forward. Down the palace steps. Moonlight poured across the courtyard like a rising tide. She stopped beside the Alpha King. Not behind him, but beside him. The Shadow Alpha's eyes widened. No. He shouted, but the Omega lifted her hand. Her voice echoed through the palace like a sacred vow. The moon has already chosen. The silver mark on her wrist burned brighter than the night sky. Moonlight exploded across the courtyard. The darkness screamed as the light consumed it. The Shadow Alpha tried to summon the shadows again. But the moon's light was stronger. The silver glow engulfed him completely. And as the light closed around him, his crimson eyes finally understood. So, the moon truly chose him. The light consumed the shadows. Darkness shattered, and when the silver glow finally faded, the courtyard fell silent. The moon shone calmly above the palace once more. And the prophecy of the moon had finally been fulfilled. Epilogue. For several seconds after the light faded, no one moved. The courtyard remained silent beneath the moon. The palace guards were still kneeling on the marble stones. Even Kaelin had not yet risen, because every wolf present understood something that had not happened in centuries. They had just witnessed a prophecy come to life. The Alpha King slowly lifted his head. Above the palace, the moon still hung in the sky, calm and silent, as if the chaos that had just unfolded had never touched it at all. Beside him, she stood quietly. The silver glow on her wrist had faded again, but the faint crescent across her collarbone still shimmered beneath the moonlight. Kaelin was the first to stand. He looked around the courtyard and exhaled slowly. "Well," he muttered, "that was memorable." The Alpha King gave a quiet breath of amusement. "You think?" Kaelin glanced toward the place where the Shadow Alpha had vanished. "I think the entire kingdom just watched darkness lose the worst fight of its existence." A few guards began to rise. But none of them looked at the Alpha King first. They looked at her. Not with fear, not with suspicion. With something far older, reverence. One by one, the wolves lowered their heads. Not to their king, but to the moon heir. She looked around the courtyard uncertainly. "I didn't ask for this." The Alpha King stepped beside her. "No one chosen by the moon ever does." For a moment neither of them spoke. The wind moved gently through the palace banners. Moonlight shimmered softly across the courtyard. Then she looked at him. "You stood between me and him." The Alpha King shrugged slightly. "That seemed like the appropriate decision." "You knew you couldn't defeat him." "Yes, I did." "And you stood there anyway." The Alpha King met her gaze. "Of course, yes." For a moment she said nothing. Then a small smile appeared. "And the moon chose you." The Alpha King looked up toward the sky. "No," his voice softened. "The moon chose us." The wind stirred again. High above the palace, the moon shone brighter than it had in centuries. And from that night forward, every pack across the northern territories told the same story. The story of the night darkness came to claim the moon heir. And the moon answered. The night a king stood before the darkness without fear. And the moon chose him. Not because he was the strongest wolf, but because he was the one willing to stand and protect the light. And if you ever hear the wolves howling beneath a full moon, some say they are still telling the same legend. The legend of the moon heir, and the king she chose. So if you enjoyed this story, there are many more legends waiting here on this channel. And until the next one, may the moon guide you to the love meant for you.